She arrived at the small community hall quietly, almost unnoticed at first. People were busy talking among themselves, fixing their clothes, taking pictures, and preparing to show whatever talents they had signed up for. The hall was warm, full of chatter and energy, and no one paid attention to the woman who stepped inside with a soft, unsure smile. She looked like someone who had come from a long day, carrying a simple old bag and wearing clothes that showed she didn't think much about style. Her steps were gentle, almost shy, as if she had entered a place she wasn't sure welcomed her. At the far end of the hall stood an upright piano, a bit worn but shining under the lights. Every now and then, someone would walk past it and try to play a few notes just to show off to friends. Some laughed loudly, some clapped for each other, and others took selfies with the stage. The woman didn't join any of that noise. She simply looked at the piano from a distance, her eyes soft, almost emotional, as if the sight of it stirred something inside her. When she walked toward the registration desk, the two young people sitting there looked up with confusion. They had been expecting lively performers, people with bright outfits or loud personalities, people who fit the atmosphere of the night. She didn't fit that image, not even a little. She greeted them politely and asked in a quiet voice if she could write her name down for the piano performance slot. One of them hesitated and glanced at the other. For a moment, their eyes showed the same doubt. Could she even play? They didn't want the audience to laugh at her, or so they told themselves. But the hesitation came partly from judging her appearance. They eventually handed her the pen and let her sign her name. She thanked them with a grateful nod and stepped aside. But the moment she walked away, whispers started, not loud enough for her to hear clearly, but sharp enough that the people near the desk exchanged looks. "Do you think she knows what she's doing?" One person murmured, "Maybe she's just trying. But why tonight?" Another said, "She didn't look back. She simply found a corner chair, placed her bag beside her, and folded her hands gently on her lap. She watched the stage as people performed one by one, dancers, singers, a few comedians, and even a young boy who played the guitar slightly off tune, but received loud support from his family. No one sat with the woman. No one approached her. A few people looked over, maybe wondering who she was or why she seemed so peaceful in the middle of all the noise. But she didn't seem bothered. Instead, she watched everything with calm eyes, almost like she was trying to take in the atmosphere slowly. Her turn was still far away, but she didn't show impatience. She looked at the piano again and again, the way someone looks at an old friend they haven't seen in years. There was longing in her gaze, but also fear, as if touching those keys would open a door to memories she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The host, a cheerful young man full of jokes and energy, finally picked up the list again. He called the next performers with excitement, hyping up the crowd every few minutes. But when his eyes reached the woman's name further down the list, his smile faded just slightly. He whispered to the assistant, "She signed up for the piano?" The assistant nodded, shrugging. "Yeah, I don't know." She looked really nervous. He looked back at the woman sitting quietly, then at the crowd. He wondered if calling her up later would ruin the rhythm of the night. The audience loved energy, bright personalities, people who shouted into the mic and got everyone pumped. He wasn't sure how they would react to her. Still, he didn't remove her name. He just moved on to the rest of the list, trying not to think ahead. But soon, others in the hall began to notice her too. A group of teens sitting near the left side of the stage pointed at her quietly. "Do you think she's going to really play?" One of them snickered. "She looks like she's never touched a piano." Another whispered, "I'm definitely recording this," one girl said, already holding her phone. These weren't comments spoken with kindness or curiosity. They were spoken with amusement, judgment, and assumptions. Still, the woman remained unaware, or at least pretended not to hear. Her face stayed gentle, but her fingers played restlessly with the fabric of her bag, as if she was keeping some emotion under control. At one point, the host walked by her chair. She looked up with a small smile and asked politely, "Excuse me, will it be all right if I dedicate my piece to my mom?" He blinked, not expecting the question. "Yeah, sure, that's fine." She nodded, relieved. "Thank you. It means a lot." Her voice was soft, but filled with something deep, a mixture of love, memories, and maybe even pain. The host felt a flicker of guilt for doubting her. Something in her tone felt real, honest, pure. But he brushed it off and continued preparing for the next act. A while later, more performers took the stage. A group of girls danced to a fast song and received loud cheers. A boy performed magic tricks that impressed the younger kids. A woman sang with a strong voice, earning applause. The woman in the corner watched every act with respect. She clapped quietly for each one, even for the ones that weren't very good. She wasn't here to compete or to show off. She was here for something else, something personal. Time passed slowly, but she stayed calm. Sometimes she closed her eyes, as if hearing music inside her own mind long before touching the piano. Sometimes she looked down at her hands and breathed deeply. She looked like someone carrying a memory so heavy yet so beautiful that it shaped her entire presence. When another performer finished, someone near the stage said, "I think the old lady's turn is coming. This is going to be interesting." Their friends laughed softly, ready to enjoy something they expected to be funny. The woman heard that one. Her fingers tightened around her bag for a moment, not in anger but in sadness, or maybe acceptance. She had experienced judgment before. This wasn't new. She simply took a slow breath and straightened her posture, preparing herself. The host looked at the list again. Her name was next. He swallowed, unsure. The crowd was loud and excited, and bringing her up might change the energy. But he had to be fair. He stepped back onto the stage, lifted the mic, and said, "All right, everyone. Our next performer is someone who wants to share a piano piece with us." The crowd quieted slightly. Curious, she would like to dedicate it to her mom. Some people smiled politely. Others whispered again, already judging. A few phones came out, ready to record. The woman stood up slowly. She held her bag close, as if it carried something important. Her steps were steady, but gentle as she approached the stage. People watched her closely, some with respect, but many with doubt. When she climbed the small steps and stood beside the piano, she placed her hand gently on the polished wood, like greeting something she had missed for years. The hall grew quieter, not out of admiration yet, but out of expectation. She took a seat on the bench, adjusting it carefully, almost nervously. A few kids in the front row giggled, thinking her movements looked too slow, too unsure. But she didn't look at them. She took another deep breath, placed her fingers lightly on the keys, and closed her eyes. In that moment, before a single note was played, the hall felt strangely still. People didn't know it yet. They had no idea. But behind that quiet posture, behind those gentle hands, behind that simple appearance, was a story they were not ready for, and a talent they would never forget. The hall had settled into a gentle silence after she took her place at the piano. But it wasn't a respectful silence yet. It was the kind that comes before an audience expects something awkward or unusual to happen. People leaned back in their chairs, some with amused expressions, some curious, and others simply waiting to see what kind of moment this would turn into. A few still held their phones up, the camera lights already glowing as they prepared to record what they thought would be a moment to laugh at later. The woman kept her hands resting lightly on the keys, not pressing a single note yet. She breathed slowly, as if gathering courage from deep within. Her shoulders rose and fell gently while her eyes stayed closed. It looked as though she was trying to calm a storm inside her chest. A few people whispered to each other, "Why isn't she starting?" A young man muttered, "Maybe she forgot how to play." Someone else replied, "She looks scared." Said another voice, "But she wasn't scared." Not exactly. The truth was more complicated. She was overwhelmed by the weight of memories pressing on her heart. Sitting at a piano again, in front of people, after such a long time, felt like opening a part of herself she had locked away for years. She wasn't afraid of the crowd. She wasn't afraid of being judged. She was afraid of what the music would bring back to her. The host stood at the side of the stage, unsure what to do. He kept the microphone at his side and watched her closely. He had prepared a few jokes earlier, the kind he usually used to lighten the mood if a performer hesitated. But something about her stillness made him pause. Something told him to let her have her moment. Finally, she lifted her hands away from the keys. The audience gasped softly, thinking she was giving up, but then she placed them back down gently, this time with intention. She took another breath, opened her eyes for a brief second, and whispered under her breath, just loud enough for those near the stage to hear, "For you, Mom." Then her fingers pressed the first notes. The sound that filled the hall was not what anyone expected. It wasn't messy. It wasn't clumsy. It wasn't uncertain. It was soft, controlled, and full of emotion, like water flowing gently down a quiet stream. A calm, graceful melody drifted through the room, and people who had been leaning back suddenly leaned forward, the confusion on their faces slowly turning into surprise. Her hands moved with a smoothness that came only from years of practice. They glided across the keys with confidence, touching the piano like it was something familiar and beloved. Her posture changed as she played. Her back straightened slightly, her shoulders relaxed, and her eyes softened as her fingers traveled from note to note. The whispers stopped, the giggles stopped, even the phones lowered a little, though many people still recorded her, but not for the reason they first planned. Something about the music made everyone pause. It was gentle but powerful, quiet but full of feeling. It wasn't just a song, it was a memory she was sharing. As she continued playing, the notes wrapped around the hall like a warm blanket. Every rise and fall of the melody carried something personal, something she had held inside her for so long. The crowd, without realizing it, had fallen into complete silence. Even the children who had been restless earlier sat still, their eyes fixed on the woman at the piano. But while the audience watched her, their expressions softening, she was somewhere else. Not in the hall, not on the stage. In her mind, she was back in a small living room from her childhood. She saw her mother sitting near her as she practiced, nodding with gentle encouragement. She saw the little upright piano they used to have, the one her mother had bought secondhand after saving for months. She remembered the way her mother's eyes shone every time she learned a new piece, how she would clap softly as if hearing magic. Her fingers played faster, not with stress, but with emotion spilling forward. She played the part of the song she used to perform for her mother on quiet afternoons, when the world felt peaceful and full of possibility. But memories don't stay sweet forever. As she moved into the next part, the melody shifted into something deeper. The atmosphere in the hall changed with it. The notes grew heavier, slower, filled with a quiet ache that everyone could feel even if they didn't understand why. A woman sitting near the front felt her eyes sting, and she didn't know why. A young boy watching her play felt a strange tightness in his chest. A man who had been laughing earlier now stared with his mouth slightly open, unable to look away. Her music was telling a story without saying a single word, but the audience understood the emotion behind it. She remembered the moment her mother got sick, the hospital visits, the way the piano in their home grew silent because she didn't have the heart to play. While her mother was suffering, she remembered sitting beside her mother's bed, holding her hand, promising she would play again someday. And she remembered the day her mother took her last breath. Her fingers trembled for a brief second, but she didn't stop. The emotion only strengthened the music, and the melody rose again, lifting the audience with it. Her face softened, then tightened, then softened again as she let the music pull her through the past. People who moments earlier were ready to laugh, now felt something completely different: respect, wonder, a strange guilt for judging her when they didn't even know her. Some glanced around the room, trying to see if anyone else felt what they felt, and they did. The entire hall was wrapped in the same emotion. No one moved, no one spoke. Every single person was listening. Even the host, who had been preparing announcements and jokes, stood frozen, watching her with wide eyes. As she played, her body swayed gently with the rhythm, like she had stepped into another world. Her face wasn't tense anymore. It looked peaceful, comforted by the music she had avoided for so long. Suddenly, a high note rang out with crystal clarity, echoing through the hall in a way that made people's breath catch. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp with emotion, like a tear falling unexpectedly. Then the music softened again, growing delicate, almost like a whisper. The audience leaned even closer. A person in the middle row lowered their phone completely, unable to keep watching through the screen. They wanted to see her with their own eyes. Others did the same, phones dropping slowly into laps. At first, they had wanted to record a joke. Now, they wanted to honor a moment. The woman continued playing, pouring everything she had into each note. She played the joy of her childhood, the warmth of her mother's love, the pain of her loss, and the hope she had carried quietly inside her heart. And though the audience didn't know her story, they could feel it. Her hands moved across the piano faster now, then slower, then faster again, like waves rising and falling at the shore. Her breathing matched the rhythm, steady and full of feeling. The hall felt alive with sound, and yet completely still at the same time. A quiet sniffle broke the silence. Then another. Someone in the back wiped their eyes quickly, embarrassed but unable to stop the emotion stirring inside them. The woman heard none of this. She was lost in the music, lost in memory, lost in a world that was both painful and beautiful. With one final soft phrase, she brought the melody to a gentle close. The last notes trembled in the air for a moment before fading into silence. The hall stayed frozen. No one clapped. No one moved, because they weren't ready. They were still inside the world she had created with her music. Her hands rested quietly on the keys. Her shoulders rose in a soft, shaky breath, as though she had released something heavy from deep within her chest. Only then did she finally open her eyes, and the entire room saw the emotion in them, tired, loving, and full of memories. For a moment, she simply sat there, as if unsure whether the audience liked it or not. She didn't play for applause. She played for her mother. That alone mattered to her. But then someone in the back stood up and clapped, a single clap, steady and sincere. Then another person stood, then another. In seconds, the entire hall rose to their feet, clapping loudly, not out of pity or politeness, but out of genuine admiration. The woman stared at them, surprised. She had expected nothing, yet here they were, cheering for her, showing her a level of respect she never imagined she would receive. Her lips trembled in a small, grateful smile. She placed her hand gently over her heart and nodded. The crowd clapped even louder. None of them knew her story, none of them knew her past, but her music had spoken for her. And in that moment, the woman who had arrived quietly and unnoticed now stood at the center of a moment the audience would remember for a long, long time. The applause still echoed in her ears long after she stepped away from the piano, but her mind was far from the stage. She walked slowly toward the side of the hall, her breath steady but deep, as if each step carried her through years of memories she had not touched in a long time. The crowd was still standing, clapping with genuine respect, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were soft, almost distant, like someone who had just revisited a part of their soul. As she reached the edge of the stage, the host approached her with a stunned expression. He had seen many performances, many talents, many surprises, but nothing like what had just happened. He didn't know the woman. He didn't know her story. Yet something about her playing had touched him in a way he didn't expect. "Ma'am, that was beautiful," he said softly, almost unsure if he should disturb her. She gave a gentle smile, her voice still calm. "Thank you." Her hands were still trembling slightly, not from fear but from the emotional weight of what she had just shared. She clutched the small bag she had brought with her, the same bag she always carried on the rare occasions she left home. A few people approached her, offering compliments, asking if she had been trained professionally, asking where she learned to play like that. She nodded politely at each question but didn't say much. She never liked talking about herself, especially not about the past. After a few minutes, she quietly moved away from the crowd, looking for a place where she could sit and regain her breath. She found a chair near the back of the hall, away from the lights and noise. When she sat down, she closed her eyes and felt the echo of the music still inside her. It had been years since she had played like that, years since she allowed herself to let go. The applause slowly faded, and the next performers returned to the stage. But the atmosphere in the hall had changed. People were still talking about her, whispering about her talent, wondering why someone like her had been so hesitant to play. She sat quietly, unaware of how deeply she had moved them, but her mind was somewhere else. Her thoughts drifted back to the day it all began, when she first fell in love with the piano. She was a child then, living in a small home that didn't have much, but it had warmth. Her mother worked long hours at a small shop, coming home tired but always carrying a soft smile for her. Their home wasn't filled with expensive things, but it was filled with love, and music, at least, when they could afford it. She remembered the day her mother first brought home a small, old keyboard. It wasn't fancy. Some of the buttons didn't work. The sound wasn't perfect. But to a young child who had always dreamed of touching real keys, it felt like a gift from another world. Her mother had placed it in front of her and said, "Try it. See if you like it." She pressed a single key, and the sound made her smile. She pressed another, then another, and soon her small hands were exploring the keyboard like it was a hidden treasure. That was the beginning. Every evening, after her mother returned from work, she would sit beside her daughter as she practiced. Sometimes she fell asleep in the chair, exhausted, but she always listened. She always encouraged her, and the girl grew better, much better. Her teachers noticed her talent early on. They told her mother she needed real lessons, real training, but lessons cost money they didn't have. Still, her mother found a way. She worked extra hours. She took small stitching jobs at night. She saved every bit she could, and eventually, she enrolled her daughter in formal piano lessons. The woman smiled faintly at the memory. She could still see her younger self sitting on a little stool beside her mother, practicing scales until her hands ached. She could still hear her mother's voice saying, "One day, you'll play on a real stage." Her mother believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. Years passed. She grew older. Her skills improved. She won small competitions. She performed in school events. And every time she stepped off the stage, her mother was the first to hug her, the first to clap, the first to say she was proud. But life has a way of changing when you least expect it. She remembered the day her mother came home looking tired, not in the usual way, but in a way that frightened her. Her mother tried to hide it, tried to smile and pretend everything was fine. But a child can sense when something is wrong. Soon after, the doctor visited their home. Later, hospitals became familiar, and the piano became silent. She couldn't bring herself to play anymore. Every note reminded her of the woman who had sacrificed everything for her. Every melody reminded her of the times they had shared. When her mother's health worsened, she spent every hour she could beside her, holding her hand, whispering softly, "Do you want me to play for you?" She had asked one day. Her mother smiled weakly. "Not now. When I get better, you will play something beautiful for me." But she never got better. The memory made her eyes water, and she blinked quickly, wiping the corners of her eyes discreetly. She didn't want anyone to see. She didn't want to draw attention. She didn't want pity. After her mother passed away, she couldn't touch a piano for years. Every time she thought of playing, she felt a heavy ache in her chest. She avoided music entirely. The keyboard was put away. The memories were tucked inside her heart, locked tightly. She carried on with her life quietly, working simple jobs, living alone, doing everything she needed to survive. But a part of her remained empty, a part that once belonged to her music. Until today, something had pushed her to come here to attend this small community event, to sign her name, to walk toward the piano she feared touching again. Perhaps it was loneliness. Perhaps it was longing. Perhaps she simply wanted to feel her mother's presence again, even if just for a few minutes. A soft sound pulled her out of her thoughts. Someone stood in front of her. It was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, holding a small notebook. She looked nervous but excited at the same time. "Ma'am," the girl said shyly, "your piano was really pretty. I've never heard something like that." The woman smiled warmly. "Thank you, dear. Can you teach me someday?" the girl asked, her eyes hopeful. The woman was taken aback. No one had asked her something like that in years. She didn't know how to respond. She hadn't taught anyone. She hadn't even played in so long. Before she could answer, the girl's mother walked over quickly, apologizing for the interruption. But the woman shook her head kindly and said, "It's all right." The girl waved before leaving. "I hope you play again." The woman watched her go, a small warmth spreading in her chest. For a moment, she wondered what her mother would think if she could see her now. Would she be proud? Would she say she knew this day would come? Would she smile the way she always did? As she sat there, lost in thought, someone else approached. This time, it was a man from the audience, holding his phone awkwardly. "Excuse me," he said gently. I just wanted to apologize. I judged you before you played. I thought you were." He stopped, embarrassed. The woman looked at him with a calm expression. "It's all right. You didn't know, but I should have," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. Any thank you. Your music reminded me of something I'd forgotten." She nodded, accepting his apology without anger. She had lived enough life to know that judgment often came from the surface, not the heart. More people approached her after that, some to praise her, some to ask questions, some to simply say thank you. But each one spoke with sincerity. She answered them kindly. But her heart remained quiet, still holding the memory of her mother close. As the event continued, she stood up slowly and walked toward the piano again, not to play, but to touch it one more time. She placed her palm on the keys. Feeling the cool surface under her fingers, she whispered softly, just to herself, "I hope you heard me today, Mom." Then she stepped back, looking around the hall. Life had moved on. People were laughing again. Performances were happening. Conversations were loud, but she felt something new inside her. A small spark, a tiny piece of the love she once had for music. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel afraid of it. She felt grateful. She felt lighter. She felt alive in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. The night wasn't over yet, but her heart had already changed. And though no one around her knew the full story, they all sensed one thing clearly. She wasn't just a woman who played the piano. She was someone who had lived, someone who had loved deeply, and someone whose music carried the voice of a memory that would never fade. The night before the performance felt heavier than the others. She sat near her small window, watching the soft lights of the town fade into the quiet distance. The piano keys from the hall downstairs were silent now. Her heart beat a little faster every time she imagined going up on that stage again. She wondered if anyone would even care to listen. After all, she had spent most of her life in the shadows, ignored or mocked by people who never cared to know her story. But she kept reminding herself why she was doing this. She told herself again and again that it wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about honoring her mother, the only person who ever understood her heart. Her mother had always encouraged her to play. Her mother had always believed that she carried something rare within her, something she must not bury. Her hands rested on her lap as she remembered the small old house where she grew up, the sound of her mother humming softly while preparing meals, the evenings when she practiced in the corner, her mother listening with her full attention. Those moments had shaped her. They had made her feel seen when the rest of the world turned its back. She smiled faintly, but soon the smile faded. She knew the people attending the event the next day. Many of them were the same who judged her, laughed at her, and whispered about her behind her back. They would be sitting right there in the front rows. She could already imagine their expressions, the raised eyebrows, the bored faces, the sarcastic smiles. Still, she breathed deeply and stayed calm. She had been through worse. Life had taught her that pain could either break a person or give them strength. She chose strength. Early the next morning, she woke before the sun and stepped into the cold air. She walked outside for a while, letting the quiet morning clear her thoughts. She watched the sky change colors slowly and felt something settle inside her. It wasn't confidence, but it was peace. Whatever would happen, she would give her best. That was enough. Throughout the day, she practiced gently on the old piano in the rehearsal room. She didn't play loudly or with any force. Instead, she played softly, making sure her fingers remembered the flow. She whispered to herself now and then, reminding herself that every note had a purpose. While she played, people walked past the doorway. Some looked inside out of curiosity. Others ignored her completely. A few whispered things she couldn't hear, but she could feel their tone. She didn't let it distract her. Over the years, she had learned how to protect her heart from careless words. Later in the afternoon, one of the organizers entered the room. He seemed surprised to see her there. "Oh, you're practicing?" he asked, as if it was unusual. She nodded with a gentle smile. He hesitated before saying, "Just make sure you don't take too long on stage. People mostly come for the guest performers. We don't want the audience getting restless." The words stung a little, but she didn't show it. She simply agreed and kept her posture relaxed. After he left, she sat quietly for a moment. She felt the familiar heaviness in her chest, the feeling of being underestimated, but she refused to let it stay. She set her fingers back on the keys and began again. By evening, the hall was buzzing with energy. People dressed in their best clothes walked around, talking loudly, laughing, showing off. She stayed near the backstage area, keeping to herself. She watched as others prepared, adjusting their outfits and fixing their hair. Someone passed by her and muttered, "Why is she even performing? Isn't this too much for her?" Another person laughed softly, clearly not expecting her to hear. She took a deep breath. She had heard worse. A lifetime of judgment had trained her to stay calm in moments like these. Her turn was still a little far away, so she waited patiently, listening to the performers before her. The hall filled with applause for others, and she wondered whether she would receive even a fraction of that. As her slot approached, she stood near the stage curtains, feeling her heartbeat grow stronger. Her hands were not shaking, but her chest felt tight. A woman from the organizing team approached her. "You're next," she said. "Just go out and do your best. And don't feel bad if people don't pay much attention. It's a long event." She nodded politely, but inside, she felt something shift. It wasn't anger. She had learned long ago that anger only wasted energy. It was a quiet determination, a reminder to herself that people's expectations didn't define her. As she waited, she thought of her mother once more. She whispered under her breath, "This is for you." It gave her strength. Finally, the announcer called her name. The lights dimmed slightly, and she stepped onto the stage. The audience looked up slowly, some with curiosity, others with confusion. She knew what they were thinking. They saw a quiet woman who didn't look like someone who could impress a crowd. She sat down at the piano gently. For a moment, she didn't touch the keys. She looked at the audience, not with fear, but with softness. She wanted to take a breath before she started. She placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes. The hall was silent. She didn't start immediately. She allowed that silence to settle over the room. Then, with a slow, steady breath, she began her first notes. The sound was gentle at first, almost like a whisper, but every note carried emotion. Her fingers moved with grace, not rushed, not hesitant. She played like someone who had lived through storms and learned to find beauty even in pain. The hall remained unusually quiet. People in the front rows leaned forward. Their earlier boredom disappeared as they watched her fingers glide effortlessly. With every passing moment, the music grew richer. It wasn't loud or showy, it was honest, emotional, and alive. She had a way of playing that carried her soul into the notes. Even people who didn't understand music could feel something. The soft expressions on their faces began to change. Surprise crept in. Even the ones who mocked her earlier felt their chests tighten. They didn't expect this. They didn't know she held such depth. She continued playing, letting her emotions guide her hands. The memories of her mother, the years she spent practicing alone, the tears she cried when no one saw, the strength she built quietly, all of it flowed into the melody. People began to forget everything else. Conversations stopped. Phones were lowered. For the first time that night, the hall was fully present. She could not see their reactions clearly, but she could feel the energy shift. And that was enough. In that moment, she knew she had already honored her mother. Whether applause came or not no longer mattered. She had played her truth, but something unexpected was about to happen. Something she never imagined. Her final notes hovered gently in the air, and the hall held its breath. She lifted her hands slowly from the keys, letting the last sound fade into complete silence, a silence so deep that even she felt surprised. Then, everything changed in a single heartbeat. The hall was so quiet after her last note that she wondered if people were still breathing. She kept her eyes lowered for a moment, letting her heartbeat settle. Her fingers were warm, trembling only slightly, but the silence round her felt thick and powerful. She didn't know what it meant. She didn't dare assume anything. She slowly lifted her gaze, preparing herself for anything: polite claps, weak smiles, or maybe the familiar disinterest she had seen so many times before. But what she saw left her breathless. People were standing, not just one or two. The entire front row rose first, then the second, then the rows behind them. Soon, the whole hall was on its feet. The applause exploded like a wave, loud and warm, striking every corner of the room. Some people clapped with both hands raised high. Others brought their hands together slowly as if they were stunned. A few wiped their eyes. She froze for a moment, unable to believe what she was seeing. Her heart pounded in her chest. She felt the same way she had felt years ago when her mother hugged her, after her first successful performance, safe, understood, and seen. A soft tear rolled down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. She didn't want to cry on stage. Not here, not now. The applause wasn't stopping. If anything, it kept getting stronger. People started cheering. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" Another voice called out, "Play again!" Someone near the back yelled something like, "Unbelievable!" She smiled gently, but it wasn't a show smile. It came from a quiet place inside her, a place that had been aching for years. She stood up slowly, bowed with all the grace she had, and then stepped back from the piano. She thought that was the end of it. She expected the applause to fade and the evening to move on. But instead, the announcer came rushing onto the stage, looking more excited than she had ever seen him. He whispered, "Please, one more piece. They don't want you to leave yet." Her eyes widened. "But I was told not to take too long," she said softly. He shook his head quickly. "Forget that. They want more. Do you feel comfortable playing again?" She looked at the audience. Their eyes were full of anticipation, warmth, and genuine appreciation. For the first time that night, she saw no doubt in their expressions. No one mocking her, no whispering behind hands, no bored stares, just sincere respect. She nodded. She sat down again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She began playing a gentle piece, something soft and soothing, the kind she and her mother used to love listening to late at night. When the world outside felt too heavy, the hall turned silent once more. Some people closed their eyes. Others leaned forward as if trying to catch every note. The whole place felt calmer, as though she had breathed peace into the room. When she finished the second piece, the applause rose again, but this time it wasn't loud or explosive. It was warm, deep, and full of gratitude. The audience clapped the way people do when they receive something meaningful. She stood again, bowed, and finally stepped backstage. The backstage area was completely different now. The same people who ignored her before suddenly rushed toward her. They congratulated her, complimented her, and tried to talk to her all at once. One person said, "I didn't know you could play like that." Another added, "Your performance was the best part of the night." Someone else said quietly, Your music touched me deeply." She smiled at each one, thanking them politely. She wasn't angry about how they treated her earlier. She wasn't someone who carried bitterness. She had learned that people often judge too quickly, but they also change quickly when they finally understand. Still, she kept her heart steady. Praise felt nice, but she didn't let it overwhelm her. She knew why she played, and that reason remained unchanged after the crowd settled. She found a quiet corner backstage and sat for a moment. Her hands still tingled slightly from playing. She looked down at them and whispered, "Mama, I hope you heard it." For a moment, she imagined her mother standing beside her, smiling proudly like she used to. That thought warmed her heart more than all the applause in the world. One of the organizers approached her cautiously. His face carried a mixture of guilt and admiration. "I owe you an apology," he said softly. "I underestimated you badly. I had no idea you were so talented." She nodded gently. "It's all right." "No," he said, shaking his head. "It's not. You deserved respect from the start." "I'm sorry." She appreciated his honesty. Not everyone had the courage to admit they were wrong. "Thank you," she said with a soft smile. He hesitated before asking, "Would you consider performing at our next event? People will want to hear you again." She paused. She hadn't thought about future performances. Her music had always been something private, shared mostly with her mother. But tonight had shown her something she never fully allowed herself to believe, that her playing could touch more hearts than she realized. "Maybe," she said gently. "I'll think about it." A few performers came to her next, some embarrassed, others openly apologetic. "I'm sorry," one said. "We shouldn't have judged you," another added. "You were incredible, truly." She accepted their words with humility. She didn't want anyone to feel bad or guilty. She wished only that they would treat others with kindness going forward, not just her. After the event ended and the hall grew quieter, she walked outside. The cool night air brushed against her face. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She walked slowly toward the place where she had left her small bag. Along the way, a young girl approached her shyly. "Excuse me," the girl said softly. "Can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Of course." The girl looked nervous at first, then said, "When you played, it felt like something opened in my heart. I didn't know music could do that. How did you learn to play like that?" The woman smiled warmly. "I practiced for many years, and I played with love. Music listens to your feelings, not just your hands." The girl's eyes widened. "I want to learn too. Do you think I can?" "Of course you can," she replied. "Anyone can, if they choose to love it." The girl smiled, thanked her, and ran back to her family. Watching her go, the woman felt a simple but deep joy. If her music could inspire even one heart, then all those lonely years had meaning. As she walked home, she thought again of her mother. She remembered all the evenings when her mother encouraged her, all the times she listened patiently, all the moments when she said, "One day, people will hear you." Her mother had been right. When she reached her small home, she placed her hand gently on the piano inside. The keys felt familiar, like old friends. She sat down and played a soft tune, a tune her mother used to hum when she cooked. She didn't play for an audience now. She didn't play for praise. She played for peace. The melody filled the room quietly, wrapping around her like a warm embrace. She knew that life would continue with its ups and downs. People would praise her someday and forget her the next. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that she had found her voice again, and she would keep playing not to prove anything, but because it was who she was, a quiet woman with a strong heart, a woman who carried her mother's love in every note, a woman who reminded the world that true talent didn't need to shout. It only needed to be heard once, to be remembered forever.